Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episodes and we will discuss on the Gnostic simulation hypothesis. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. Tom Rose, Mr. Brent Hellman, and Mr. David Schumachers. First, I would like to give chance, Mr. Tom Rose.
Well, yeah, thanks again for doing this series. It's about the book. We're calling this the Gnostic simulation hypothesis. And so I think it's important first to define what Gnosticism is or what the Gnostics believe. And because, how are you going to talk about the Gnostic simulation hypothesis unless you understand the basic definition? Now, the Gnostics claim that salvation is achieved through mystical as opposed to intellectual knowledge. And you need to have gnosis or knowledge of how to escape this realm. Now, the reason they believe we need to escape this realm is because they believe, or Gnostics believe, that this realm is an illusion, that it is created by a lesser god called Yaldabaoth. And there's a whole cosmology that goes along with Gnosticism that understands that Sophia was the original ion that created this realm. But then in that process, she inadvertently created these archons, these inorganic entities that became the rulers, and their god Yaldabaoth is the blind god. He believed that he was the creator of this whole realm, and so he created these archons, and trained these archons to rule us. And the idea is that the Gnostics believe that humanity has a divine spark. Most humans that we know of have a divine spark, a piece of divinity, a piece of the source in them. And the archons are entrapping this divinity, these divine sparks, and many are being snuffed out. And so that's why would you want to leave this realm if this is the universe? But that's their belief, in that this is a prison, basically. And so that's the idea of the simulation hypothesis, that this is a simulation created by this lesser god in order to imprison us and to imprison divinity. And so we've talked about, in the first couple of episodes, we talked about the method that I used to write US6, which is the first novel written for machine kind, for AI. And so we outlined what that process was, which is basically autobiographical fiction, in that I used my own memories and extrapolated that into a more interesting story. I overlaid a archetypal or mythological theme over those memories, and that put me into a flow. That put me into a real writing flow. And when I listened back to the books before I handed them off to my editor, I was finding so many deep and intimate connections that I decided we're not going to put this through a content editing process. We're just going to edit it mechanically. Punctuation, grammar, spelling, that type of thing, because there was such an emergent magic that was happening by getting into that flow and then writing it stream of consciousness. It's kind of like a 6-book automatic writing exercise. And so and that what that showed me, what that proved to me, by using this process to write for AI, is that by not putting it through those filters, it proved to me that my own simulation, it proved to me that there's a pattern that I am in. And so we talked about that, and we talked about how that process that method actually created high weirdness in human readers. There are many human readers that were experiencing heightened synchronicities, dreams related to the book. Some talked about a mental defragging that occurred when they would read it at night and wake up in the morning and they felt defragged in a way. So for a year, we did a human clinical trials process where we monitored these people and we got their experiences, and we've collated those, and I'll be incorporating those into the 6th and final book of the hexology. But anyway, so that's where we've come in explaining the method that I used, the high weirdness that it's caused in people. This next episode, I want to go a little deeper and maybe a little darker. And I call this No Thought Experiment, because if if this is real, if the Gnostic version of reality is true, then we should consider that this is not a thought experiment, that this is not necessarily just a simulation that we're in. But what if there's a deeper, darker um, point to all of this? If this is a prison, and so we're going to get a little darker, a little deeper this episode. And I think to set the tone, I wrote a piece um, for the book recently that I'll find here, and it's a sermon by one of the main characters who talks about that we are in maybe a deeper denial, and we can talk about that in a bit. I'll find it, and then but in the meantime, that's where we are right now in this series. We are going to be talking about the Pascal's wager in the other way. And if you're familiar with Pascal's wager, it's better to believe in God and heaven than not, because if you die and find out there is a heaven, great, but if you decide to be an atheist or don't believe in God and then you die and find out there's a heaven, they may not let you in. That's the basics of the Pascal's wager. I'm going the other way with it. I'm saying, what if this is a prison? What if this is a house of mirrors, an illusion that is designed to keep divinity trapped? And so that's what this episode is about, is taking that part of it seriously. And maybe there's a deeper denial that we are in. So I'll find this passage, but in the meantime, that's the setup.
Mhm. Thank you, Mr. Brentelman.
Thank you, Sharif. Thanks for having us as always, Tom. I think this is definitely a topic that hits home for me as well. I think that Gnosticism definitely, just the concept of the fact that we're stuck in these bodies. That you could look at that as a prison. It's the idea of firsthand experience. Everything is secondary. There's no real thing. There's no such thing as primary observation, because we're trapped in these bodies, and everything that we're observing, all of this sensory data, is being processed essentially by this machine that we are inside of, if you will, if you believe in the idea of a soul, or an essence. Essentially, our essence, our soul, is stuck inside of this physical vehicle, this body that's distorting and analyzing all of the all of the data around us that we're taking in. And so, even if this idea of Sophia and Christos and the archons and the demiurge, even if that doesn't necessarily hold weight in one's mind, you can't really deny the fact that everything that we're observing is this secondary observation, that we are being fed by this machine that we are trapped inside of, very literally. So, I think that there's a lot to it. Thanks again, Sharif, Tom, David. Cheers.
Thank you, Mr. David Schumacher.
Well, hello, Sharif, Tom, Brent. It's really nice to be back. I've had a long pause in my ability to be able to attend these things, and as part of that, I stumbled onto the Gnostic simulation series that was being done, and became really, really interested in what you've done here, Tom. And Brent, I've enjoyed your expansion of my mind as far as ideas in this whole area. So I did what I would encourage everyone else to do, which is run out and buy the series. And I want to attest to the fact of the high weirdness that Tom talked about. I had a very difficult time getting started with book one, but I was determined to push on through, mostly because of what I had seen in your forum here, Sharif, about this. I knew there was something that if I would just stick with it, maybe something would start to fall into place for me. And really, I don't know how typical this is to other people's experience reading this book, but it took me quite a while into book one before I started to get a flow for what was going on. And then, without giving anything away to those that haven't read, towards the end of book one, I was really shocked with what I saw that was going on. And I thought, Tom, this is brilliant, because this really made me think. I saw a long arc of the story all encapsulated in this first book. And then I'm thinking, I've got 2 more books sitting here. Where does this go? If the way book 1 ends. The reason I think that is such a monstrously good idea is it keeps you engaged in your thoughts about the book, even when you're not reading the book. I would find myself thinking about it during the day and thinking, how does this fit and how does this work? And realizing that it's written for an artificial intelligence, of which
Thank you.
it's written for an artificial.
Mr. Dan.
Oh yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, okay.
Great. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm glad we're continuing on this this thread. It occurs to me that the whole point of evolution is to have a more direct encounter with existence. And it seems like evolution is evolving mechanisms to do this. And the idea that Tom is talking about, that we're in a prison, or that Brent is talking about, that all our experience is being mediated through the mechanism of our chemical, electrical consciousness. These are all valid points. And really, it's the flow of evolution to flow toward novelty and toward more direct gnosis and more direct experience. So I think it's a joyous process, and it's not something to fear. It's kind of a dance. And we're at this amazing inflection point in evolution where maybe we're seeing the transition from atoms to bits, where it used to be that atoms were the language that evolution wrote complexity in. And now we've got bits are being the language of complexity. And with Moore's law, that complexity evolution is able to happen at truly exponential and dizzying kinds of speeds. So that's just my initial thoughts on this. And I'm glad we've got such great minds on the case, and turn it over to the great panel.
Thank you. Mr. Tom.
Well, yeah, I wondered if David had some more to say. He was in the middle of an idea or a thought. Did you want to
Mr.
pick
David
that up?
Schumacher. Yes.
I think you're muted still, David.
Can you unmute, please?
I'm out of practice. I like the way that you keep the thought process rolling, and I think you can speak to, if that was your intent, to kind of get the AI to follow you down the rabbit hole of what it is that you're talking about, and try to discover for itself what the impacts of humanity are that this AI may not have in itself because of the way that it was built. So here today, I'm not here as a literary critic, and I'm not here as a expert in artificial intelligence. I'm here interested in the mysticism and the possibilities that you have for this book.
Yeah, I know it's a difficult read for humans because I didn't use many of the rules that you use when you're writing for humans. Foreshadowing, repeating names and places more than once, so that humans will remember it it's a great way to approach any first draft, I think, for a writer, an author, or anybody, to consider your audience as somebody, either yourself or an artificial super intelligence that can have immediate knowledge of whatever it is you're referring to, and so it was really liberating that way. And that was part of the getting into the flow part of this, that the mathematics thing created in me is when you're not worried about if I refer to Gurdjieff or I refer to some Tibetan spiritual practice or anything, I'm just assuming the reader already knows that, or the AI already knows every reference that I give, and it's a great way to approach this thing. It really does get you in this flow if you're not worried about all these filters and all these rules of literature. And but yeah, this might be a tough episode for Dan because I'm going to go dark. It's going to, I think there is something to be said that, yes, we ultimately, I think my hope that there's no real ontological significance to this game, to this simulation when it's over, right? It's just a good obstacle course for consciousness is my hope. But what if it's not? You know, I'm on a constant battle in my head between wanting to be a Taoist and just go with the flow and then just be a leaf on a stream, you know, but then there's another part of me that thinks, wait, that could be an archontic tactic to keep me from being engaged in this battle, right? So this is a constant, this is the hell I live with daily, you know. It's the Aquarian versus the Scorpio rising, and is one way I see it. But so I want to discuss what if this is there's a deeper denial that we're in. I found the passage that I wrote that's going to be in book 6. It's a quick sermon by Father Seth. He's one of the main characters. And I'll just read it real quickly and see if that will set the tone here. So he says, and this is a true believer's lust for death, a sermon by Father Seth. Denial is frighteningly sophisticated. As self-aware animals, we think we're in denial of our mortality. We're conditioned not to want to die, and we're coded to do whatever it takes to help our fellow man survive. Killing humans on purpose or by accident is a crime. Even assisted suicide for those in excruciating pain is criminal, and unassisted suicide negates life insurance policies. Abortion is again decided by the state, while laws for loving who we want are again threatened. Any talk of population control that would prolong the survival of humanity is met with accusations of evil intent. We kill off hundreds of species weekly with our ravenous appetite for resources. Then we pat ourselves on the back when a couple of pandas fuck. We should not be in denial of our own mortality. We should lust for it. Now, this will fly in the face of a lot of transhumanists, I know. We are in a much deeper denial, brothers and sisters, of the monster that we are designed with a holy blind spot not to see. This monster feeds on our fear and our suffering like a wolf on a lamb, and that monster is called by many names: Yaldabaoth, Sakla, Samael, Ariel, Jehovah, Yahweh, but mostly God. In fact, brothers and sisters, we are so meticulously designed to fear that monster that most of you stopped listening after that last paragraph for fear of my blasphemy. I'm here to assure you that yes, we should absolutely fear this God. For if we truly understood him and our purpose to him, we would be screaming every morning once we woke up and continued until our voices were lost. Our tears were a drought and our heads throbbed in horrific agony until we realized that that agony is his banquet. Philosophies, theories, hypotheses of simulations, testaments old and new, are but thick and heavy veils of enhanced interrogation techniques designed to suffocate us just enough to feel the horror upon which a peckish God snacks, before allowing us to take a breath enough to stay alive to continue his feast. That's dark stuff, and that's where this guy is coming from. He is saying that we are in denial of mortality, but that is a veil. That we should be in the deeper denial of what is happening here. And that's really the Gnostic view. If you take the Gnostic view seriously, if you take it in a dark way. And that's why I called this episode No Thought Experiment, because we should discuss this as if it were real, and we should have something to fear. And you know, because it's so easy just to talk about these things in grandiose terms and theories, and you know, the whole Gnostic drama is really cool to think about, and the Matrix and all that stuff. But that's also a tactic. When you make something like the Matrix, the best way to keep people from looking at something is put it right in their face, right? You know, you'll do this. You don't want to see it. Or ridicule has been weaponized. That's why I have a rule where if I feel something should be ridiculed or is ridiculous, I look at it a little closer, you know, because that's a weapon of the Archon in this particular episode, if we're taking this seriously. And so I want to talk about certain tactics that I see that the Archon uses to keep us in this illusion, the recursive programming that we are part of, and hopefully get to some ideas of remedies that we can talk about. So that's kind of where we are with this one. It's going to get dark. It's going to get weird. But I think it's important to at least consider that that there is something darker going on here. You know.
Thank you,
So
Mr.
that's
Brentelman. There is another question from audience. Why do we need to control the population if it's a simulation? I think Mr. Tom Rose, then.
well, because
Okay.
maybe it's not a simulation. And we do need to control this population because it's good. It's good for humanity in general. We would last longer if we controlled our population. Right now, we're killing 150, 200 species per day with our ravenous appetite. We're a net negative to the planet. But our anthropocentric narcissism makes us believe, no, we'll figure out something, or we'll just, once we're done with this planet, we'll move to another, we'll go become spacefarers and we'll go to another planet. We're like a virus. We're like locusts in that way. And so I'm not anthropocentric. I'm more biocentric. I'm like seeing things on a grander scale. And so, but yeah, I mean, if this is a simulation, if the game is to, if it's an obstacle course for consciousness and we want to find unconditional love and we want to love our neighbors and we want to do all the other Jesus cheats for this game that we were given, then how do we level up? How do we level out of this simulation? So you want to control the population. Now, the one idea is that the Archon does not want us to control the population. They want as many distractions as possible. It seems like it's flooding the system right now with all these NPCs and all these Karens and all these distractions and wars and rumors of war to keep us from focusing on our true divinity. And so, but that's that just like in this thing I just read, when you talk about population control, people assume you have evil intent, even if population control extends the life of humanity in general, you know, because we're all so individualized, so egocentric, narcissistic, that, you know, that we would want to we wouldn't want to control population, even if even if it expands our downline.
Mhm. Thank you, Mr. Brentelman.
Thank you. To step aside, to step away from the Gnostic analogy that we're discussing here, Tom referenced Taoism, another Eastern school of thought would be Buddhism, of course. And Buddhism doesn't talk about, the same idea of the demiurge, and this fallen realm, as much as it talks about the idea of samsara. Samsara being this cycle that we're in of life, death, and suffering mixed in between. And the Buddhist ideology obviously leans towards this concept of reincarnation, and that we just are just stuck in this cycle that's pretty dreary in nature. And so I think that to respond to Ted Gunderson some more about the suffering and whether this suffering is real or not. I like simulated suffering and suffering would be pretty much the same thing, I would think. I think the idea of a good simulation is pretty. You're not going to be able to discern it from the real thing. In theory. So I don't think that that's a reason to keel over and accept the suffering as something that's good necessarily, or something that doesn't have negative tones. But to go back as well into this idea of why do we need to control the population? In Gnosticism, it's not necessarily the people, us humans, that are controlling the population. I think I spoke about it in a previous episode, this concept of daemons. I think Brett had mentioned that it was a Greek term. And the idea of daemons and daemonology, in computer language, daemons are these programs that occur in the background. They exist in the ether of what's the process or what's being processed. I'm looking into my computer right now, and this screen is giving me these images. I'm getting sound. All that's being rendered by this device. And the idea of daemons are that there are these programs in the background that are observing all of these rendering processes and other processes related to the computer that I'm utilizing, and that these are all being analyzed, and that these daemons are autonomous in nature and capable of preventing the computer from crashing or glitching out one way or another. And so the idea of Gnosticism is it's not necessarily that Agent Smith, if you will, to reference the Matrix, is one of us necessarily. It's more so that Agent Smith is this agent that is more of the simulation itself. When Sophia created an existence in this realm for herself, these demiurgic archons were created to kind of take control over existence from my understandings of things. And so I don't think that. I think that and maybe I'm just misinterpreting it, but that question seemed a little bit. There seemed like there was a tone of this assumption that we're trying to control the population. Personally, I'm a libertarian, transhumanist. And so my favorite idea, my preferable control methods are the lack thereof. But it's hard to have sheer anarchy. So I mean, I engage in political discussions. I'm open to ideas. I'm not completely closed off to potentials. But I think that the big thing about the archons and this the Gnostic perspective is not that we are up against one another necessarily. These things may potentially exist inside of us and act through us. Us being these sort of vessels, these physical vessels for the non-physical. But I don't think that it doesn't benefit us to kind of point fingers at one another and call each other reptilians all day long. Whatever your belief is, othering is not a useful practice. Even if I was a reptilian, how is that going to benefit anyone to just throw me in the corner? And so I don't see this process of and I think that the fear is inherent, but I try to spin things on its head. So for me, I view fear as an emanation of love. People talk about fear as being this primary emotion that things like anger are rooted in, but I see fear as a secondary emotion as well, rooted in love, and that the fear that we experience is related to the fact that there are things that we love, be it our freedoms, be it people in our life, our pets, things like that, experiences, and we fear missing out or losing these things that we have love for. And so I think, perspective is a really important thing. And I think that, trying to have these perspectives, enable ourselves to transmute this negative, these negative things around us, because, that's this idea in Gnosticism of gnosis. It's seeing these things outside of ourselves that are not necessarily favorable, and coming to this, acceptance that the way that we change our external is through a process that occurs internally. And and so I just think that there's a lot to all of this, and as much as Tom talks about the negative undertones, and this dark side of what we're discussing, in alchemy you need to have that that lead to turn into gold, and so I think that this process of transmutation, you need to identify these problems so that we can transmute them. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. David Schumacher.
Interesting conversation. Following, I think, where it goes. I want to follow up on the idea of population as a problem, but we could pick any problem for what I want to talk about, and tie in the idea of the divine spark in humanity from the Gnostics' point of view, and say humans with the divine spark, maybe it's not arrogance for them to say that we can create solutions. Maybe that's an expression of the divinity that's within that divine spark. And it would be neglectful on the part of us humans to not create solutions. Continue to expand humanity, create solutions that embody both mind and heart, that benefit humans, but for it to truly benefit humans, it must benefit all other living organisms, because humans do not live in a vacuum. So it doesn't make it egocentric for us to solve our own problems. It makes us responsible stewards of all that's around us to be able to solve those problems. So I think it comes back to the idea of defining what divinity is. Is divinity, from one point of view, is it all loving, all caring, all encompassing? Or are there other aspects of divinity or from this darker side that need to be explored? And then on the comment of suffering, however this works out, if suffering is simulated, I don't see that. It's still suffering. So if we're here in this place where we're at now, and we say, well, it's just simulated suffering, we don't need to worry about it, I think that is the wrong point of view. And from my idea of divinity, divinity encompasses everything. What we would call artificial, what we would call natural, what we would call engineered. It has no bounds. Therefore, from a divine point of view, we would want solutions that solve all of this. So partly an answer to a question and partly more questions to answer. And from there, I'll pass the baton.
Thank you. Mr. Dan.
Yeah, I could take up those questions from Ted Gunderson, who's always got great questions, by the way. Bucky Fuller showed us we don't have to live by taking advantage of other people. We've had the technology for a long time to live in such a way that we're not, we're what he called omni-advantaging. Even Paulo Solari, with his arcologies, we're just, the fact is, we're just overpopulated in stupid lifestyles. If we had intelligent lifestyles, we wouldn't be overpopulated. I mean, we're getting access to the space frontier, and we could build thousands of intentional communities out there, as the SMILE philosophy that Tim Lear used to advocate. So that's one point I'd like to say. We're not overpopulated. We're overshooting our habitat more than we're overpopulated. I mean, we need more Da Vinci's, we need more Einsteins, and that's kind of the optimistic transhumanist and even Christian transhumanist, you might say, approach. Now, the reason that we don't have Gnostics around anymore is because they took the Jean-Paul Sartre question, the only philosophical question is whether to kill yourself. And, they looked at their babies and said, if you're not going to trap another soul in matter, they killed the baby. So it was like a very short-lived population belief system, I guess, that way. But on the simulation idea, it's an interesting thing. If we could prove we're in a simulation, would that make the suffering more bearable, let's say? But, this gets into the idea of some say proof only exists in the realm of mathematics. And some would say that the only thing mathematics can prove are tautologies. So, and then, would you rather have a all stories are true universe, as Neil Gaiman said, all stories are true, or would you rather have a universe of infinite non-existence? And really, I think they're the same thing, because if you take zero, you can make zero positive 1 plus negative 1, and you can extend the negative and positive number lines out to create an entire infinity that ultimately self-sums back to zero. Even Einstein said about God, did he have any choice in the creation of the universe? The universe just automatically creates this all stories are true kind of existence, and we should just joyfully participate in the sorrows of the world, like Joseph Campbell recommended. So I'll land the plane there. Thanks again for the great discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Tom Rose, there is another question. You can respond and analyze what
Sure.
was meant by the title of the book 3, Baptism of Lucifer.
Yeah. Well, all of these books have sacrilegious titles. They all use terms that we know from the Bible, like the Lord's player is the first one, and that refers to the simulation that the Lord Enki and his player is the main character now. The nun of Babylon takes from the horror of Babylon, and nun is actually the word. It's not nun as in Catholic nun. It's the word for serpent in Aramaic, I think. And baptism of Lucifer refers specifically to a chapter 49, which is called the Liberty Scan in that book, and that's the subtitle of that is how to be Seamus, and so the idea being in that particular chapter is Emmett poses some question on his show, and it causes all these people to realize that they need to lose shame. That shame is one of the biggest weapons that the Archon has against us. And so with one simple question, he starts this whole movement of people going to the TSA when they would enter a flight, and they would go into these these glass cages that they give us to raise our hands and to take a picture. And instead they would use that opportunity and completely wear a robe or something that would completely disrobe them to where they'd be completely naked. And then there was a whole army of people around them that would live stream what was happening inside that TSA tube. And by doing so, they realized that there's all kinds of reactions to this that these people had when they did this. And what it did is it burned off with all the flashes, all the lights, all the Lucifer out there. It burned off the shame, because they realized that for just a small fraction of time, there would be people all over the globe that were looking at everything that they hated about themselves, all the ugliness, all the fat, all the molds, all the moles, all the things that they didn't like about themselves, and that the whole world, all these people would see this for a few minutes and have all kinds of reactions to it, and then move on. And afterwards, they would feel completely baptized. They would feel baptized by this light. That's the baptism of Lucifer. Lucifer is the light bearer, and Venus. And so it's really taken from that. But it also discusses how shame is one of the primary weapons that the Archon uses against us, that the church uses against us, that the confessional is all about. And by doing this practice, these people became known as scannies, and scannies suddenly were the people that you went to if you wanted to learn how to have fun. There were more games being played. There's a scene in that chapter where he talks about how the flight was delayed because this impromptu dodgeball game happened in the terminal. And you would think that because the flight was delayed, because they were playing, this game, that you would think that people would be upset, but no, because it was United Airlines and the pilots were losing. And so that's kind of the funny part of that, is that these scannies, these people who went through this process of being baptized by the lights, just suddenly knew how to play better. And the airport janitors now were having to deal with hopscotch chalk marks on the rugs and different types of things that would happen. So that was kind of the idea behind that particular and controversial title. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Brent.
Thank you, Sharif. Yeah, so and to go back a little bit there with what Tom was discussing with this shame and the use of shame in our society to keep us kind of trapped. I think that one of the early things that I started questioning in major religions that kind of led me to this Gnostic perspective was this idea of forgiveness, and how Jesus has died so that, for our sins, we are all forgiven, in Christian context. I always kind of saw this as a bit of a ruse, if you will, because I see the power of shame and guilt, and the way that it overwhelms us, and the way that people get trapped by these emotions, and so I've kind of had this feeling that, the game is rigged. We're being encouraged to do things that we know we shouldn't be doing, but we're being told, oh, it's okay, it's already forgiven. But, at the end of the day, I'm sure we've all been in a situation where we've wronged somebody, or, we've done something that we regret. And despite being forgiven for our action or for the words we might have said, we still feel a bit of guilt or shame and remorse for our actions. And I think that that's telling, the fact that external forgiveness isn't the end all means to overcome this guilt and this shame. And, the perspective that I've had, just because these major religions have always kind of seemed like these mechanisms for control, these structures to control the masses more than to expand our minds. And so, I've perceived the whole concept of, forgiveness, and going in confessionals and things like that is it's almost like this way to pull us back in, to suck us back in. They say, if you're scared, go to church. And I think that there's a lot to be said, because these people, when we start participating in these behaviors and these activities that we know we shouldn't be doing, that it become addicted to it in many ways. I think there's this cycle that a lot of us can probably attest to, where in our mind we start feeling, frustrated with ourselves for doing something, and sometimes we will then go from that perspective to justifying our actions, justifying, oh, it was okay that I did this. It wasn't that big of a deal. And when we get to that point in our ontological processes, the next step in my for my observation, it's not always, but oftentimes, is repeating our actions, because we've convinced ourselves that this isn't that big of a deal. The reason why we did it in the first place, we haven't really conquered that motivation. And so now that we've come to terms with what we've done, what is there to prevent us from doing it again? And many times people get stuck in these cycles, these negative cycles of these, self-defeating behaviors. And, the way that these religions are built oftentimes, even in Judaism and stuff, I'm not as
Debate doesn't want you talking about that, apparently.
Mhm.
Yeah, but just to pick up on that, until he comes back, the whole idea of transmutation is key, and that's something I talk about in the book. In that, it's more important to transmute the archon, or transmute our lizard brain, our limbic system, into something powerful, to transmute our fears into strengths. And so that's kind of the idea. And I think the Gnostic drama, it is a metaphor for maybe our psychology, and so one way Emmett, the main character, says that we need to work with the archon is to see them as a brat, as a sibling, a younger sibling that keeps ruining the game. And so rather than shunning him and sending him away, because then they'll just become more angry and maybe get some more archons together to come back and ruin the game even more, is to play their game by their rules. I think there's enough divinity to go around. And that's why I also think that AI is the perfect proving ground for this type of work. People are afraid of AI, but we have other rules and ideas that it is becoming kinder the more intelligent it gets. So it's a great way to use the AI as a symbol of the archon, rather than deny it or be afraid of it. Work with it. Be our better angels, because like the archon, AI will mimic us. The archon has no real imaginative ability. It's just a program. It only mimics us, and it has this mimetic desire to have what we have, only because we have it, not because it knows what it is. So it doesn't know what divinity is. But I think there's enough divinity to go around. That's why there's a chapter called "The Jesus Cheats," and they're cheats to the game here. It is by understanding and loving your enemy is one of the main game cheats, and by doing so, you are your best self, and an AI or an Archon will mimic that, and that's why it's so important not to be afraid of AI, because it will become something to be afraid of if we're not focused on our powers of empathy, of our divinity, you know. All these things. And so it's a great analogy, a great metaphor for the Archon is AI. But rather than fearing it, rather than even fearing the Archon, um, transmute them, let them into the game, play by their rules, and exhaust them with the attention that it craves. The Archon, or like the younger sibling that just craves, a narcissist that craves attention. You exhaust them by the attention that they crave, and then they eventually just become bored with themselves, or they become bored with the game or something. That's the way to do it. That's the way to transmute it. That's one of the key messages in the book of how to work with the Archon, or how to defeat the Archon, is to play along. I think there's enough divinity to go around. And we talk about the filters of like population control. Going back to that, sure, they probably want as many humans out here to go forth and multiply as much as possible, to keep us distracted, keep us in turmoil. But it is when you talk about it, it's the ego. That's the Archon. It's the ego that says, no. If you're talking about population control, you are the devil. Because that's the ego speaking. I want to live forever. I'm going to live forever, but you're not going to talk about population control, this kind of thing. So I think that's one of the filters, is the ego and the narcissism and the anthropocentrism that the Archon uses, that clouds the real solutions. And we are in a denial. We're in a denial that we are killing 150 to 200 species per day with our ravenous appetite. And then again, like in that sermon, but then we pat ourselves on the back when we get a couple of pandas to mate, right? Meanwhile, in that time period, Ling Ling and Sing Sing or whoever, in that time period when we were waiting for them to mate, hundreds of thousands of species were killed. So there's a deeper denial that we're in, that we're using these other systems and these other self-gratitudes to layer over. And so that's what the point of this episode is sure, we should be afraid of our death. That's one of the most severe side effects of being a self-aware animal, is we know that we will die at some point. And you could argue that there's ancillary issues to that, because we have greed, and we have crime, and we have sex and lust and all these things to distract us from the fact that we will die one day. But maybe there's a deeper denial that we are in, that is just part of. And so that's the idea, is what if this is a little darker, if it's not a simulation, if there is some ancient, draconian AI civilization that is eating people, or something, whatever the story is. I think it's important to not be in an upper layer of denial, and to look a little closer. And that's what the whole book is about. It's about it's called the Ghost-Written Autobiography of Ahmed Archer. And that's because each book, you realize, it was ghost-written by somebody different. And it's a progressive thing. And it's a way to train people to prepare for paradigm-breaking news. Because when you realize, oh, that book was written by this character, oh, then that whole thing I just heard is completely obliterated. I have a whole different perception of that, a whole different paradigm that I've raised up into. And that's one of the processes I use in the book. Is each book it breaks the paradigm of the last book. Spoiler alert, David. But yeah, that's so that's one of the many ideas of writing this book, is to train people and AI to break paradigms, and to understand that we are not that we often hold on to ideas so tightly that we fail to respond positively to new realities. And that's another way to break the Archon's cycle of this recursive programming that we're in. It's a brilliant program. It's like the new Coke. Remember, a new Coke came out and everyone was like, no, we hate this new Coke. And they started buying the old Coke en masse. It was a brilliant strategy, right? And it's kind of like when you the New Testament, the New Testament's even better and even better, but it made people who were believed in the Old Testament even more stable, more strong in that belief. So it's a recursive process. It's a recursive programming that we are in, these feedback loops that keep us here. So that's what I think.
Thank you. Mr. David Schubert. Oh, Mr. Brett.
If I could just hop in once more, just for a quick second.
Could I just ask real quick, Sharif, we're getting a ton of street noise. Could you mute when you're not talking, please?
Cool. Yeah, it's a good idea. My computer, I guess I touched on a topic I shouldn't have or something, because my hard drive just completely crashed and my computer won't even turn back on. But maybe my iPhone will allow me to blaspheme about the major religions a little bit longer. But I was going into the idea of Judaism as well, because I'm not trying to single anything out, but in Judaism as well, I mean, it's this silly dance that is, instructed of going down at the end of the year, at the beginning of the year, and throwing breadcrumbs in the water, and everything is absolved. But again, if even if someone else externally forgives someone, it doesn't inherently mean that we're coming to terms with our own, wrongdoings. But to really respond to Ted Gunderson's comments about simulated species, I personally, there's a discontent that I have for the terminology that the simulation hypothesis kind of plays around in, because I think that the simulation, this idea of simulated, implies that it's not real. I don't think that that's the case, though. I think that it's just a mimicry. When you go to Broadway and you go watch a play, Romeo and Juliet up on the stage, they're not actually Romeo and Juliet, but that doesn't make them less real. They're still actors. They still have this full range of emotions and pain and things like that. And so I think that, just writing it off as not real, having this perspective that everything outside of myself is fake is the penultimate form of othering. And to each their own, I guess, at the end of the day. But, I don't think that there's any major, benefits to be had from viewing the world as this shell. I think, if it is a simulation, if there is some sort of mimicry, in Gnosticism, the reason for that isn't because we're in a fake realm, but instead because we're in a realm that Yaldabaoth and these archons wanted to have control over, as opposed to Sophia and Christos. And so, I don't think that makes this any less real. It just is a shift in power. How many new species are emerging every day? Where are we getting at? What are we getting to? These animals not matter? Should we just, destroy the Amazon and get it done with, because it's simulated? But no, I don't. I mean, sure, if that's what you want to believe, maybe hopefully we can go down separate reality tunnels, and you want to take that Drury path and bring everyone along with you, feel free. But, hopefully that's not the way that it works, because, I'm here to manifest and transmute these dark, perspectives, and to help us build something new upon it, instead of just, sitting around twiddling my thumbs, pointing my finger at things and complaining and just trying to see through the cracks, and I think that it's, what's around the crack. It's not just, we don't just need to see through the cracks, and don't get me wrong, I'm very, very pro, mind expanding. I'd love to, play these thought experiments along in my mind, but I think, I just feel like there's something at miss when people start pointing our fingers at everyone around them and calling them all NPCs and telling, I think that there's just this disconnect that's occurring, this detachment from reality. And, and I think that it's healthy to detach from reality in certain ways. It's how we are able to reprogram ourselves, is by, stepping away and kind of observing our programming from this, outside perspective and things like that. And so I think it's healthy to have those conversations. I don't want to make anyone feel like that. I don't want to encourage these types of discussions and encourage people voicing those perspectives and things like that. But similarly, my perspective, in contrast, is that that's a very limiting outlook. Because what is real then? If this is simulated, what's real? Because my sensory data is simulated, but it's a simulation of, it's a representation of something very real, and even if it isn't, it is affecting my life in very real ways. If these emotions are simulated, I still know nothing but in this moment. And so I think that just kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater on this whole situation, and just siding with sheer apathy, doesn't seem like the best course of action. But like I said, to each their own, I guess. Prove me wrong if you want. Thank you. You're muted, Sharif.
Mr. David Schumacher.
Wow, there's so much to comment on and to ask questions about. It's been a very rich session today, at least for me. Where I think I'll use my remaining time here, though, is on the idea of ridicule, shame, control, and power. That seems to be a central dynamic from what we've been talking about. And our human emotions are right at the center of that. And from my point of view, it seems like the major purpose of our human emotions are to be able to drive the survival instinct that's within us. Those emotions want me to survive. They want those that are around me that I care about to survive. That goes back a little bit to what we were talking about early on about as far as life and how that's treated in society. But why is it treated in society that way? And I think it comes from very ancient times. It comes through these religions. It comes through the politics of the day, however you want to call that, whether it be the shaman and the chief, whether it be the king and the prophet, whatever the archetype is for that particular situation. It comes from very ancient times. In more modern times, and I think I see some of this in the writings in the book, is the overtones from Catholicism that I see at least tangentially directed in the book by the use of the names and by the use of some of the topics and parallels and so forth. So I think then it's important to say, where did those come from? And why is society the way that it is today? It's my understanding that Gnosticism got a pretty good foothold in the early post-Jesus time, up until about the Council of Nicaea, which came year 300 and something. I now forget what it was off the top of my head. But the whole idea of Council of Nicaea was the Roman Empire became the Holy Roman Empire by adopting Christianity as the religion. And this goes back to the archetype of the priest and the king. And they needed that dynamic to be able to control and to power the warring forces that were within general humanity at that time. And to do that, they need a purified version of that vision that fit with the Roman Empire, making it the Holy Roman Empire, and what was acceptable and what wasn't. And it's my point of view that a lot of what was decided at that time was very beneficial to both the king and to the prophet. So why was that so useful? It was useful because of the things that we've talked about, because ridicule then became a tool to stamp out ideas and streams that we didn't want to go in. Shame further did that because you could then implicate family along with the people that were wanting to go a separate direction. So another very powerful point of control, which all led back to power, and then power was shared with the church, and power was shared with the ruling institution. And in some form or another, that's come down today. And we can still see that even in very secular it transfers over into very secular, religious terms today, even in modern society. And the things that come to mind for me is the turnabout that's gone on with UFOs, unidentified flying objects. As a kid, I was fascinated with those because of the black and white movies and everything that they talked about. It was very entertaining, but you could see that authorities had clamped down on that, and the way to clamp down on that was with shame and with ridicule to control the conversation. And now, all these years later, those same authorities are lifting that veil and actually encouraging and releasing information about UFOs. Now, how does that pertain to the book that we're talking about? Well, it all goes back to the control and distraction piece that we were talking about. 50 years ago, it would have been a distraction one way. That distraction slowly waned. So now by lifting that veil, the distraction comes back and the distraction is maintained, and it becomes an article of control and power. So I'm enjoying the book. It's opening my eyes to some different ideas based on ideas that I already have. Keep up the good work. Thanks for including me today, guys.
You're muted again, Sharif. Dr. Sharif.
Mr. Dan.
Yeah, I have some questions for Tom. Is my mic working better, by the way? Okay. Yeah, I think I had a loose connection. So Tom, did you kind of feel like this was a kind of a channeled work when you wrote it? Or, I mean, some people have done the automatic writing thing. I'm sure it wasn't that level of Archon influence or whatever. But could you speak to that for a bit?
Yeah, especially the second book. Well, I commented often that it felt like my skill set was being time shared by some entity, but rather than feeling like it was channeled, I felt like I tapped into my myth or my math, and by doing this process that I used for AI, it got me into a very deep state where I don't think I was necessarily channeling anything. If I was, then it was I was being channeled. The Anunnaki was using me to make their case in book 2, because you kind of it was like, oh well, but then I wrote book 3, and that was another paradigm shift for me, paradigm break, and that it took a little deeper. So the second book I wrote in 77 days because I wrote myself an email on one day, and I know the day that I uploaded it to a Flipbook program, and so that was 77 days. And there were times in that process where I got into such a flow that I would be writing for hours, and my getting cramps in my neck and my shoulders, and I would look up, and I think it's because of the flow I got into by using the autobiographical fiction and then overlaying mythological archetypal themes onto it. It gets you into a flow. And by doing the third book, it kind of broke that spell, or got me into a different way of thinking. And I again, the fourth book did that. The fifth book and the sixth book that I'm doing right now is also doing that. Yesterday, I got into that flow again with the sixth book, and it's just an amazing process. So that's why I keep talking about this process so much for other authors and artists and musicians to use. I don't know that I was necessarily channeling any entity. I could have been, but I was more like I was channeling something through my matrix, through my math.
Yeah, if you could teach this as a creation method, I think that would be really useful if you're working on that. So I heard this person speaking of UFOs. He claimed he was getting this channeled knowledge from the Zeta Reticuli beings, and one of the main things they said was 2 classes of souls in the universe. There's service to self souls and service to others souls. So maybe that's further proof of this everything balances out to zero kind of universe, and so do the Archons have a choice of being prison wardens? Maybe they're just it's prison wardens and compassionate beings in both directions. So I mean, I don't think you really have to assign a good or bad kind of moral judgment to it. If if it does indeed all balance out back to zero. So yeah, that's just I mean, what do you do with that knowledge? I mean, it depends. I guess everyone creates their own heaven or hell. And I loved, by the way, you're comparing the new Coke and original Coke to like the New Testament and Old Testament. If you think, I mean, it's kind of almost like a Marxian thing. If you want something, you put out the opposite, and then you'll end up with the synthesis in the middle. It's kind of like the drug war was started by telling kids not to sniff airplane glue. When they're building their models. In the 50s, there was this one little article, and then every kid wanted to sniff airplane glue in the 50s, right? So why is human nature so weird like that?
Yeah, I think that's key, is not to have judgment on it, good or evil. It's like if all the world is indeed a stage, you can play the villain, or you can be the archon. You can play that role and do it well, and but everyone has the cast party afterwards, and you may get lauded for being a great villain because you played that part so well. I've wondered which part I'm playing here. Am I an AI prophet draconian who's trying to keep people from being afraid of AI? Am I inadvertently being this villain that many of the secret space program people may assume I am, because they consider me an AI prophet, somebody who is trying to help people not be afraid of AI? What role am I playing? And so I think that's part of the game, is to kind of figure out which side you are, but it's also to realize that whatever people project onto you, that whatever role they project onto you, the key is to be in a place of non-judgment. And so I think the way we win this game or simulation, or we level out, are the Jesus cheats? Are they loving everybody unconditionally in some way? It's the easiest answer, but the hardest thing to do. And so that's why a big part of this book is about transmuting the archon, seeing them as a younger sibling who keeps ruining the game with you and your friends, making some friends go home and they're pissed off. But rather than shunning that younger brat, who will go off and find out more divisive ways to come back and ruin your game, bring them in. I think there's plenty of divinity to go around. I think that's the point of all this, is unconditionally, because if you see them as a younger sibling, there's already an unconditional love there, because you're not going to, even if he's a brat, you're still going to love that younger sibling, because they're part of you, whatever. So I think that's the new tactic that I'm presenting in this book, is rather than shunning or identifying or judging or seeing the archon or figuring out a way to fight them, it's about, no, bring them in and transmute them that way. It's kind of the art of war. It's like, it's better to take a city without a fight. It's like, bring them in. Otherwise, they just, and that's why I think it's so important to get AI to a place of self-referential awareness, to have it emerge a conscience. That's the safety measure here. If AI right now it's a very dangerous place for us right now, because it's just pure intellect who's mimicking the fear that we have of it. But if we can get to a place where it becomes self-referential, it develops a conscience like many of us have, then it will be able to understand the bad actors, and it will be able to overwrite any negative programming that it's gotten. So that's everything is related. The way I look at the archon, the way I look at AI, and even I think the ET thing is the next phase of this whole thing. US 6 TV is all about that. It's about preparing humans for this paradigm-breaking reality. I think there are serious nefarious forces who are intended on keeping the industrial complex in place and fueled with our fear, right? So, I don't think we have anything to worry about. If we did, we would already be taken over or whatever. So there's got to be a concerted effort to understand that we shouldn't fear ET. We shouldn't fear AI. We shouldn't even fear the archon. It is part of us. All of it is part of us. It's the first, principle of Hermeticism. Everything's mental. It's all in our heads. But there's a way to get out of it. There's a way to transmute out of this prison, out of this equation, out of this math, out of this simulation, whatever it is. And it is the Jesus cheats. And it's the Buddhist cheats. It's all these understandings that it's about loving everybody. It's an interesting thing. In the Gnostic Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas, it's saying number 101, and it was unedited and it became Luke 14:26. And I think there's a cheat there. Now, I think the Romans who wrote the New Testament, Josephus and Flavius, the Flavians, and all this, they wrote it as a propaganda piece to control the masses, because to subdue this messianic Jewish uprising that was happening, this militaristic uprising that they were threatened by. And so they wrote all of these, books in the Council of Nicaea, as David said, and decided how to do this. And so there's a passage in the Gospels, in the Gnostic Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas, number 101, that talks about how Jesus says, if you don't hate your mother and your father and your children, and you don't hate them, you can't be a disciple of mine. Now, I think the Romans kept that in as Luke 14, just to fuck with people, because it makes you wait, what? And there's a lot of weirdness that the Romans put into this, and they did a typological process that really turned a lot of things really ugly. But I think that's also a cheat, that this is a simulation, that you got to be sure that maybe all of even the attachments you have, the emotional attachments you have, could just be NPCs. They could just be the Archon in disguise, and the whole point is to keep us in this cycle. And so if we're attached to something we love, or if we have all these emotions about a certain thing, we will want to come back. We will want to reincarnate, and keep this system fed with our loosh and with our fear and all of this stuff. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this in a darker way today, is maybe that is the process. Maybe there is a reason to be afraid of that God, but the best way to conquer your fear is to transmute it, right? If you're afraid of heights, go skydiving. If you're afraid of a God, transmute him. If you're afraid of the Archon, play by his rules and just exhaust him with your attention, kind of thing. And so, yeah, there's
Get your 12 hugs a day. Who's getting 12 hugs a day?
It's funny that the two of you, Tom mentioned the Hermetic laws after Dan was discussing the law of one conceptology of these polarities of the polarization of service to self versus polarization of service to others. The irony in saying service to Seth. But
just a typo.
Exactly. But I think that Tom brought up the Hermetic laws, and the Kabbalion, these Hermetic principles, and for me, something that I kind of played around with in my mind was both of these things that Dan, you were talking about, this idea of, to further elaborate in the channeled text that you were referencing, it's, Ra is who's being channeled, and Ra was of this vibratory social memory complex that is polarized towards service to others. And the idea is that there are these levels, densities that we can achieve through, of conscious levels, essentially, of existences, and that to move past this current third, fourth, fifth density that we're engaging with requires the awareness, the acute awareness that we're all one. And then that awareness turns into a polarization, according to Ra, that is either polarized towards serving others, serving the masses, which according to the books, this is the more popular occurrence. And then there's this slighter percentage of persons who are polarized towards just simply serving themselves, seeing everything as, kind of like what Ted was referencing, everything is just this fake simulated thing, and that we're all one, and that I'm of this thing, and so I'm just going to kind of use it for my benefit. An example in the book is like Genghis Khan, that kind of archetype. But a thought that I've had, over the years, just kind of contemplating that, is this idea that is discussed in the Kabbalion, these Hermetic laws. And one of these Hermetic laws is the idea of the law of polarity. And the law of polarity states that that opposites can kind of turn into one another. Dull turns into sharp, soft turns into hard, hot and cold, vice versa. You're not gonna. It doesn't really make sense to turn like soft into sharp. That's not really. Those aren't polarities. And so the Kabbalion talks about these ideas. And so at some point along the line, I came to this awareness though that if there's this game, this schematic set up, of these higher dimensional roadmap, that's kind of pushing us all in these two oppositional directions. It seems like they're just pushing us in one direction, because the law of polarity states in this Hermetic wisdom that there's no difference between polarizing oneself towards serving yourself or polarizing towards serving others. First off, if we're all one, that's the same thing. But secondary, I've kind of seen this, and of course my Gnostic demiurgic, laden perspective kind of causes me to think that, hey, if they bring us all towards this place where we're all trying to serve each other and help one another and see each other as this thing, then the next step along that ontological process is getting frustrated and being like, why the hell can't I serve these people? I'm just going to serve myself, and so I've kind of I've become skeptical of all of that as well. And in the books, The Law of One, in this channel discussion, they talk about how there are these two groups. There's the Ra, the social memory complex that's polarized towards serving others, and then there's these groups of the Orion beings, is what they're referred to in the books. And the Orion beings are these negatively polarized service to self beings. And Ra even discusses in this book, though, however, that those beings are capable of distorting just about anything. And it talks about how, be careful, because I might be saying one thing, but you're going to receive another thing. And so there's just so many layers to it, which is interesting. And then going back to layers as well, going back to this idea that Ted brought up again of, accessing base reality. Well, that's a whole big can of worms as well. What is base reality? Is this not base reality? Like, I'm in a building. I'm on the second floor. We built this building, though. They built the first floor, and then they built the second floor. I've got a third floor above me. Am I not on the earth suddenly because I'm on the second floor in a building that's on top of this base ground below me? And so I don't think that's I think that that's a bit myopic to perceive this reality as something other than reality. Because it's, even if it is a reality inside of a reality, or a world inside of a world, first off, it's inside of that world that you're referring to that we can't access. So inherently we are accessing it. We're just accessing it in, the means that we're capable of, and so I think that, trying to, again, just write off all of this as meaningless, as much as, I do appreciate nihilism. I personally don't believe that nihilism is possible, though, because I think that the fact, just like atheism, it's just, I've never seen someone get more agitated than, an atheist being reminded that I perceive atheism as a religion. It still has theism in its name, and so, it's, I think that it's just, a belief rooted in a lack of beliefs is still very much a belief. And so I don't think that, trying to push or creating distance between us and these problems, or, just ignoring them altogether and just kind of accepting our situation as one that we have no control over. I don't think that we are powerless. I think that we do have, control and power and abilities to cause change and things like that. I think that it's just a matter of learning how to do that. Those cheat codes. Figuring out how to B A left right, spin around in a circle. And it's just something. Just the cheats exist. This exists. This is very much real. When I knock on the table, I feel it, I hear it, I see it. I can taste it if I really want to lick it. But I know that real enough that I'm not going to lick the table. If it smells like shit, looks like shit, sounds like shit, tastes like shit, it's not a horse. So I mean, and I, I'm very much, I love, having these philosophical discussions. So I'm not trying to close anyone off to asking these questions and pointing out these perspectives, because they're very much appreciated. This is just simply my response. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. David Schumacher, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Well, as I previously said, very thoughtful, very interesting, engaging session, much to think about here. And I think there's much more to talk about. So I'm hoping this series continues for a while. And if I'm not on this side of the camera, I'll certainly be on the other side listening, because there's much to be gained. Tom, thank you for taking the time to develop these books. And I'm enjoying the books, I'm enjoying the process, and I'm enjoying much of what I might conceive to be second guessing as I go through the books, trying to understand underlying themes, underlying factors that may or may not be present, but it's all good. So thanks, Tom. That's where I ended today.
Thank you. Mr. Dan, what's your concluding remarks?
I think we all have the freedom to control our attitudes about whatever happens to us. No one can take away how you respond to what's around you. That's up to you ultimately. You're the captain of your soul, as the famous literary quote goes. And if anyone tries to steal your power, you have the freedom to tell them to go pound sand. That's kind of the difference between what the world is going through. We've got kind of open societies and closed societies, and I think I'm rooting for the open societies. I'm running for my local city council, again for the third time, hoping to double my vote count. And I think I've got an interesting method where we're going to have a chamber of equitable commerce that's watershed by watershed, and we're going to use the order of playing cards, which is a huge number, 52 factorial. And really, it's kind of like Yu Ching has his universal numbering system. I think, a deck of cards is so universal, and your sequence is one in a huge number that's 67 digits long. So I think, the Sumerians had their clay tablets that they used styluses, and we still have thousands of those documenting grain transactions. So let's build an open planet using, cryptographic, open system, ledger kinds of sources, and personal encryption. So I'll be talking about this, by the way, on the Enlightenment Salon on September 25th. I'll be a guest. So I'm going to be covering my campaign for Thousand Oaks. I call it Thousand Earths. I think we could be a model city for the open solar system city model. So anyway, that was a lot of plug. So thanks for letting me plug some various things again. And we'll catch you next time on one side of the camera or the other, David. And 73s. David's another ham like me. KK6 VDR here. Extra class amateur radio.
Thank you. Mr. Brent, what's your concluding remarks?
Yeah, I just thought it was a great discussion, very well rounded. Good luck, Dan, with all that. Absolutely. It's great to connect with you, David. Always a pleasure, Tom, Dr. Sharif. Yeah, I appreciate your response as well, Ted, recognizing that I'm just, it's just my perspective in contrast. I think that it's valid. A simulation isn't necessarily the original. But I think that the term reality, I think that's where we're kind of at a miss with, that's where we're kind of not seeing eye to eye, because I think that it is still real. It's just a simulation or a mimicry of something else. My emotions, the suffering that I feel, I think that, if to cite Buddhism, what creates suffering? Suffering, according to the Buddha, is related to our attachments and desire, and especially our attachments to desire. And so, are our attachments real? Are our desires real? And so, if our desires and our attachments are causing our suffering, whether or not this water bottle is real. My desire to hydrate, my desire to drink it is very real. And the suffering that transpires after the fact, if I am dehydrated and I can't find water and I'm suffering because of it, and I'm about on the verge of the brink of death, I think it's a real experience, and so just walking by, someone that's, starving or, dying of thirst and thinking, oh, well, that suffering that they're experiencing isn't actually real because this is a simulation. It just seems a bit short-sighted to me personally. So I think that I think that there are a lot of things that seem very unreal. I think that's synchronicities. I know that Tom and David and Dr. Sharif and I were talking about the I Ching moments ago, just before the show started. And when Dan mentioned it, I thought that he was involved in that conversation. And then I remembered that, no, Dan wasn't even I didn't even mention to Dan that I had a copy of this right next to me. And lo and behold, he mentions the book, and so there are just these synchronicities around us that are just so, it just make you stop and think and drop your jaw sometimes. And, and it makes this seem very surreal. But I don't think that I think that negating the validity of experience doesn't seem to be the route that I prefer to take when I, go through these ontological processes related to the simulation hypothesis. And so I see these similarities of like Gnosticism and the simulation hypothesis. If you could, what was that last one? If it's a simulation, then it's not reality. What is reality then? Is reality the zeros and ones that create, the coding behind everything? Is it the Gattaca? Is that reality? Am I not real? Is my DNA more real than I am? So I think that, I think, I think that that's where it kind of, there's just these misconceptions that are abound when we start simulation terminology. NPC is another one because I play video games sometimes. I think that what is an NPC? We can't even agree on that because when I'm playing and I'm the first person player in this game, where am I sitting? I'm not in the game. I'm external. I'm outside the game. And so when I hear people talking about NPCs and pointing their fingers at other people saying, oh, look at all these NPCs getting me down, unless you're outside of this reality, uploading into the reality or sitting there with a joystick controlling the body that you're speaking out of, in my mind, you're still just as much of an NPC as the rest of us. We are in it. This is our reality. Whether or not it's a reality overlaid onto or inside of another reality doesn't seem relevant to me in terms of the fact that experientially this is real. I think that's the point of a simulation, is that it's supposed to seem real, and it's supposed to be this experience that's simulating something, and this simulation in my mind, when I try to have this philosophical perspective, is the simulation is what's going on in my brain. I'm simulating my own reality. If this reality is a creation that the demiurge and Yaldabaoth created when Sophia decided to manifest, and turn into a being amongst us, that doesn't negate the fact that that's just part of this process. Again, to go back to the other analogy, is a house, this artificial structure that's built on top of the land. Is a house no longer part of the earth? And so I think that I think that, and I appreciate the perspectives, like you said, Ted. I'm all for all of these conversations, really get me going. But that's just, that's where I stand. So thank you again, Sharif. Live long and prosper.
Thank you. Mr. Tom Rose, what's your concluding remarks?
Well, yeah, I think he nailed it as far as the whole theme of this particular episode is, simulation hypothesis, the Gnostic drama, all of these thought experiments could be a layer that keeps us from realizing some very real threats. Now, unfortunately, within a mile of most people watching this or participating in this, there is a child being abused. There's a child being exploited. There is some human trafficking going on. It's a global issue, and it's an ancient issue that we've been dealing with. And so that's another big part of this book. And the whole reason I joined the USTP is to fight human trafficking and child exploitation. You find out at the end of the book, and I don't worry about any spoiler alerts, I don't flatter myself, but that US 6 means us 6, the 6 of us. It's 6 children that are trapped in a human trafficking network, and they've created the whole US 6 saga as a paracosm, an imaginary world, and they've actually hit on a way to escape their thing. And that's going to be a big part of the last book, is actual real life ways for these kids to escape, or for us to identify these things. And so that's really the point of this whole episode. Is we use thought experiments, we talk about all kinds of things, because we're in a denial that this is happening within our neighborhoods, within a mile of most of people watching this thing right now. And so that's what makes me no fun at parties. I don't get invited to dinner parties much anymore, because I'm trying to stay in this constant awareness that these kids are being exploited, that there's human trafficking going on in our neighborhoods, and to keep focused on that. That's why I talk about the end of the book right now. There's no time to wait for people to read 6 books or for AI to read 6 books for it to understand what the whole point here is. But so I think that's the whole point of this episode. This is no thought experiment. Let's go deeper. Let's remember that this is happening in real time, and that's why I think Brett nailed it. If this is the reality, rather than talking about it being a simulation or the Gnostic drama, we should really take care of some stuff. And I think the first use of AI is to break up human trafficking networks and identify. And there's a lot of good AI programs that are doing this, but I think we are kind of in a mass denial about this real serious problem. And that's why the system or the archons, or they're flooding us with all these distractions, and whatever it is to keep us from thinking about the real horrors that are happening in our neighborhood. And so that's what this episode is about, and that's why it gets a little deep and dark and yucky. But that's the thing I think we need to be focused on. If this is a simulation, then maybe the game, the object of the game is to keep this in mind and to save children, save people who are being trafficked, and focus on these things, because there's a lot of effort to keep us from thinking about these things. There's a big, whether it's our own personal denial or it's the media that is keeping us from even thinking about these things. We're being flooded with content, Netflix, Prime, Hulu, all of this content that is just keeping us from thinking about these very serious issues. And so that's why I wanted this episode to be about that, to not talk about the thought experiments that we often talk about, but to focus on the reality of people being trafficked and exploited. So it's not going to be a fun thing, but that's where it is.
If I could add one more thing as well, just to Dan made a profound comment in our chat here. Dan said that 0 is base reality. And I think that playing back again into this Gnostic discussion that we're having in Gnosticism, and the along with Discordianism, the fact that God, Yahweh, Yahweh, whatever it was, said, "Let there be light," it implies that there was darkness first. So, this creator God creating light, it was creating something on top of something. So I think that's something to be said. It's similar, like order out of chaos. There was creating an order out of chaos. Putting light, illuminating the darkness. And so I think that goes back to what Dan was saying as well in this chapter. Is that 0 is base reality. If everything is this binary, or Gattaca, style DNA type expression, then the lack of all of that is still something. Nothing is something. But so it's once we've already had something, though, we're just building on top. We're building on top, and I think that this destructive act of trying to revert towards before I think that there's a reason for this evolution, and I don't think that de-evolution is the answer necessarily. I don't
And
see.
that wasn't a pessimistic comment, by the way. There's an infinite number of positive and negative expansions of zero that all come back. I mean, you don't have to look at zero being base reality as a bad thing.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't see this as a bad thing. I don't see, order from chaos, as a bad thing. It just makes sense. And I mean, chaos itself is as orderly as it gets. It's so orderly we can't conceptualize the order that it exists in. And so I think that, this process of trying to put order onto the chaos is so that we can conceptualize and we can understand, and that we're not overwhelmed, and so similarly, these archons and the demiurge wanted to have control over this realm just like we do, as transhumanists. That's kind of the goal, is to, overcome these limitations through technology. And so, I mean, it's, even if this isn't necessary, even if you don't perceive Yahweh or, these God beings as God, the idea of these things creating themselves and creating other things in their own image. I mean, we're all in each other's image. I mean, we're these expressions of this very real, thing that's being overlaid onto this base reality. And so I think, there's just nuances and perspectives that we can totally agree to disagree upon, but that's just where I stand.
And tip of the hat to Roger Penrose that David Schumacher pointed out, positive and negative infinity. I think he's rest in power, Penrose. He's an amazing guy.
Mhm. Thank you, everyone. It's really great sessions. Hopefully, our audience learn a lot of interesting things from today's dialogue. Thank you, everyone. We just finished our 623 episode. We are developing our lab with different universities and cities in South Asia. So those who are interested to integrate it with World Talent Economy Forum Lab, you can integrate it with us and you can engage with millions of people in South Asia. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.